Hello everyone. Vulnerability management, told partly through the medium of the now 15-year-old UK sitcom, The In-Betweeners. If you're familiar with The In-Betweeners, this may make a very, very dull, boring topic a little bit more entertaining. If you're not, well, A, why would you come to something with such a pompous and stupid title as that? And B, I do apologise that this won't make a lot of sense. But hopefully there's enough vulnerability management stuff in there to make it interesting. So we'll start with the obligatory Who Am I stuff. I'm Glenn, I'm very old, certainly compared to a lot of you. I've done virtually every job in InfoSec and IT over the last many years. But for the last 7, 8 of those, I've been specialising in vulnerability management. I work for a company called Flutter that you probably haven't heard of, but most of this is about the time of the now Flutter-owned division of Skybet. And it was lovely to hear Rich and talk before actually call out the gambling industry for actually being at the leading edge of actually getting stuff right. Because I feel that we are generally on the front edge of, I get a lot of horror stories for how bad everyone's finding you. The keynote from Holly at the beginning, her horror stories of, she's still fixing SQL. So I like to think that at the other end of that spectrum, actually, we're getting things mostly right. One of the reasons I'm doing this talk is a major vulnerability vendor holds our program up as one of their examples to their customers of how to do it right. So the fact that I'm touted out regularly at conferences by a vendor to say, go talk to this guy, these guys have actually nailed this, I'll take that as a credit. I know what I'm talking about roughly. Outside of a day job, I am a big conference junkie. If I'm not talking, I'm attending. If I'm not attending, I'm volunteering. And later this year, we're doing BSides Leeds. We're bringing that back. Mr. Carney, formerly of BSides Leeds, doesn't really need a round of applause for essentially what was. I mean, Sam's not in the room, is she? What started at DEF CON, I wanted to bring BSides Leeds back. I knew that I wasn't sensible and grown up enough to do it. I got drunk at DEF CON with Sam. Actually, Ben, also in the room here, was unintentionally part of that. I said to Sam, it's like, Sam, I'm Ben. I can do excitement. I can do fun. I can do all the silly stuff. But I need a grown-up to actually organise me. I am Ben of Newcastle. I need a Sam Humphries. And Sam went off the next morning, woke up to a text saying, "Hi, I'm Rosie. At the moment, I'm organising BSides Lancashire, but I believe you want somebody for Leeds. I can be your grown-ups." Anyway, I already can't fit this in. Liam is following me up, and I already said I'm going to overrun. I've done an extra 2 minutes there I didn't need to. So, so I do an awful lot of conferences. I do love talking and organising and stuff like that. But this place is special to me. I grew up in Lancaster. I'm from the area. I didn't attend university here, but this is my real hometown. I live in Leeds nowadays, but this was kind of special to me. I often sort of joke about the fact that where I grew up was like growing up in a Peter Kay sketch, but certainly my sixth form years were very much like the In-Betweeners. Again, if you're familiar with the show, I grew up, there was 4 of us, 4 close mates, first day of high school at a very rough comprehensive. The slightly better off of our friends did turn up with a blazer and a briefcase on his first day. We did have a little tatty yellow car that we drove round in and shouted obscenity at people out the windows, and I absolutely, genuinely did spend my weekends at Caravan Club. So, In-Betweeners speaks to me on a very, very personal level. So, anyway, before I talk about how we do vulnerability management and how we do it differently, let's talk about traditional vulnerability management, the way most places do it, the way everyone starts off. So they go down the CVSS route. And to be fair, when I was putting this slide deck together, I realised why this was a really stupid idea, because I can't use in-betweeners memes, because very few of them aren't offensive in some way or other. So if you're familiar with the show, you can work out what's under that sensor. So anyway, traditional vulnerability management, what generally happens, penalties realise like, we need to do something like this. They go out and buy usually one of the 3 big tools out there. They scan all the things, they get all the vulnerabilities back, and they get this unimaginably huge pile of vulnerabilities back. A number so big it doesn't make any sense to them. It's like, a normal sort of medium-sized organisation. It can be tens of thousands of vulnerabilities. It's like, where on earth do you start with that? So they do the only logical thing they can, they panic. And then if they get the option, they run away. for most of us nowadays, the job market isn't that buoyant that running away is an option, so somebody actually ends up having to try and fix that. So what they do, they go, right, we're going to knuckle down, we're going to fix this, and they throw absolutely loads of resources at fixing this. They go out to their system owners, their operations team, their devs, whoever is responsible for it, and they prey on them. They take up more and more of their time. They're expected to dedicate more and more of their time to actually patching to keep these systems up to date. And it very quickly feels like you're not making any progress. It feels like you're putting in huge amounts of effort and not getting any real gain for it. That's just treading water. That's just keeping in the same place. And as a result, your vulnerability management team, or vulnerability manager, becomes one of the most hated person in the organisation because all they're doing is sucking everybody's time and not providing any real obvious benefit. And that seems to go on forever. No matter how much resource it, no matter how much you try, you always seem to be in this, well, it's not great sort of stage forever. So, yeah, analysis of that way of doing it, not great. So we want to come up with something different. Back then, it didn't have a name. This was a thing we started sort of 6 years ago. I can't take all the credit. I've been standing on the shoulders of giants. But the last sort of 18 months, it's got a name. It's now called risk-based vulnerability management. We didn't come up with the idea. Well, we did come up with the idea, but lots of other people came up with it simultaneously. We certainly didn't give it a name, but it was only as this started to emerge and things like, hey, we already do that. That's literally what we came up with. So, what is it? What have we actually got in there? Well, we worked out the traditional approach wasn't working. We had to go and sell something new. We had to try and get the system owners to work with us in a different way. So we had to come up with a new way of doing this. So we came up with this pitch that was kind of different. What we actually wanted from the team was far less patching than they were already doing. We were doing away with unobtainable SLAs for anyone that's sort of not already in school. SLA, service level agreement, basically an agreement from system owners for how quickly they patch certain types of vulnerability. We essentially let them set their own SLAs. We said, for this sort of thing, how long do you think is reasonable? You know, we asked the question, high vulnerabilities? You reckon you can fix them in a week? God, no. Yeah, you reckon you can do a year? And they're like, that's, surely you're not going to let us do a year. It's like, if that's what you're going to tell us. And we let them set their own SLAs, which again seems very mad. We discourage whack-a-mole patching to hit deadlines. So whack-a-mole patching, if you don't know what that is, it's literally unprioritized patches. But basically, see how much patching we can do in one go. We'll try and make these big numbers into little numbers. We'll take these 100,000 vulnerabilities and see if we can get it down to 80,000 by the end of the month. We did away with all that. We stopped reporting big, scary numbers in reports. We stopped sort of saying, we have this number of vulnerabilities. We did away with all that. We prioritized automation of tooling over resource-intensive patching. So if a team said, well, we've got two choices. We're either going to miss our SLA this month, or we're going to actually spend that same time building some automation that we can use in the future. We're like, build the automation, sod it. We'll cover up, we'll explain away your SLA breaches if your behavior is correct, if you're doing the right thing. And we pretty much did away with punitive measures for missing SLAs. It was genuinely all carrot, very little stick. And we changed the focus not from patching efficiency or patching efficacy, but actually on risk and remediation. So we stopped trying to say, this team has patched this number of things, this team has done it. It was much more around of this behaviour they've done the right thing rather than they were very good at patching this month. So, better? Definitely better. Now, most of you in this room, I'm assuming, would be security people, and you're probably sitting there thinking, this sounds absolutely insane. Why would you do this? Why would you take an area that's already pretty bad and essentially take away all the controls, take away all the force you've got to make this better? Why on earth would you do that? Well, first of all, nobody cares about vulnerability management. I care about it. Very few people actually care about vulnerability management, certainly outside vulnerability management itself. But they do care about risk management. Modern businesses understand risk really, really well. It's a proper business thing now that risk management is an essential part. So, we started switching to, doing things in terms of risk rather than vulnerability. We moved to this sort of model because most vulnerabilities that your scanning tools will find, in a lot of cases, could never be used in your specific organisation, in your specific setup, in any part of valid attack chain. Yes, the software is still vulnerable, but there's a good chance that you're not using it in conjunction with a certain module or a certain configuration setting or in a certain, there are lots of whys and wheres for us that your scanning tools won't be able to detect, won't be able to know. And in a lot of cases, they're just looking and going, oh, right, that's version 1.36. We know that's vulnerable. We'll flag it up as vulnerable, even if it's not actually in a way that could ever be part of an attack chain. Another reason that we switched it is that optimal isn't fixing the most vulnerabilities. It's fixing the ones most likely to get your organisation compromised first. So it all comes down to prioritization. Sometimes, if you've got a choice between fixing 10,000 vulnerabilities or fixing 5, those 5 are the 5 you should go for, because those are the 5 that are going to get you owned. The 5,000, 10,000, the huge number over there, they look bad on reports, but if they're not really ever likely to contribute to that compromise, why the hell are you spending time on them? On the SLA thing, the fact that we let people set their own SLAs, that was actually a little bit smoke and mirrors. If you let people set their own SLAs, they're much more invested in them. They can't use the argument of, that's unreasonable, you're asking the impossible. It's like, well, you set these, this was your thing. It's like, if you now think they're unreasonable, let's talk about that, we may be able to change them, but by letting them set their own, they were much more invested in hitting them, whereas if you just give them some arbitrary number, they'll just miss it and go, well, couldn't do it, mate, you're asking too much. I mentioned on our pitch that we didn't really penalise people for missing patching SLAs. That doesn't mean that we just ignore it. We do report upwards, this sort of thing, but we don't report upwards, oh, they didn't hit their SLA, they were meant to patch all this, they didn't. What we report up is the risk of that action. The fact that, this stuff hasn't been patched within a reasonable window, the risk to the company is this. It could be the risk to the company is insignificant, it could be the fact that the risk to the company is huge, but it takes away from this, we're judging them on their ability to patch, and moves it on to, we're telling you about the risk to the company. Another reason that this is the thing to move to is that when I first started in this industry, time to exploit was huge. SLAs around patching were sort of 30, 60, 90 days. And that was quite reasonable. That was, generally a vulnerability come out. It'd take a while before it got weaponized and, it was actually a real threat to organizations. And over time that's been coming down, and then like the big watershed for all that, where everybody suddenly got that this was an entirely new game we were playing, was Log4j. Because I remember, sort of the night before it really broke, read about it online. It was just a Minecraft thing. It's a bunch of kids annoying each other on Minecraft. Nobody cared. Doing the school run, walking my son to school the morning after. A couple of people that I knew on Twitter were just sort of saying, you should probably take a look at this, because this looks a little bit bigger than Minecraft. And by lunchtime, we were getting weaponized attacks bouncing off our WAF at the outer edge. And it's like, hang on, that's gone from, this is some kids annoying each other on Minecraft, to we're actually seeing weaponized attacks of this in 12 hours. There is no point having a 90-day SLA if actually that means that you've got 89 and a half days where you're in. So moving to this sort of model where it's like, actually, the stuff that we need to act on now, we'll act on now. The stuff that actually isn't really much of a risk, we'll deprioritize that and act on it when things are less busy. Brought side of it. I'm about to say, we've got the actual system owners on board. They think they're being sold a great new thing. We've got security teams on board because, hopefully you people now realise why we're doing this. Made lots of friends. The big question on this is that how on earth do we actually pull this off? How on earth do we actually get to this mythical thing where everyone's doing less patching and generating less risk by doing less patching? Well, actually, most of the secret sauce, most of the cleverness for this is in the reporting. The actual mechanics of it don't change really at all. You still go out from there and buy your Qualys, your Nessus, your Nexpose, whatever. You still scan it in the same way. You still get this absolutely huge pile of vulnerabilities. It's all what you do with that data. And we're generally, most of the audience here, I'd imagine, would consider themselves techies. Techies love numbers, but actually numbers can be quite destructive if you don't understand what they're really telling you. So, as part of that, we stopped reporting on total number of vulnerabilities. Total numbers of vulnerabilities is a meaningless metric, or not meaningless, it's a very destructive and very distracting metric. Big number must be bad. Not necessarily the truth. And a lot of the reason for that is churn. And in vulnerability management, churn is essentially the number of vulnerabilities you get closed off each period, sort of each week, each month, that then another equal number of that come back the next month in the new updates. To give you an idea of how quickly that builds up, something like a Windows roll-up patch can easily patch, several hundred vulnerabilities. So your tools are going to tell you you've got several hundred vulnerabilities on several thousand machines, potentially the size of your estate. And even if you've got nice automated patches, if WSUS is kicking in and patching those within 2 or 3 days of them coming out, if you happen to run your reports just after Patch Tuesday, it's going to go, look, you've got hundreds of thousands of vulnerabilities, and the truth is you have, and they're going to go away, and then by the time next time you run the report, a whole new pile will come back. So by ignoring that churn and just reporting on things that weren't patched within the agreed SLAs, it allows you to deal with much more manageable numbers. It allows you to focus on the problem areas, not the areas that are actually already being taken care of. We then started, we did it much more prioritization and top-down. Now, if this was a longer time slot, and if I talk a lot more about how to prioritize your vulnerabilities, there are lots of clever ways of prioritization out there now. We've built some absolutely glorious stuff that takes into account hundreds of different metrics in doing that, but we haven't got time to talk about that today. So we'll just assume that all we're using is the CVSS score. On its own, it's a really crap metric, but it's the best we've got. So we start by saying, okay, everybody, just focus on your criticals. We want to get to a point where all criticals are managed within SLA. Sort everything else. We don't care about everything else at the moment. Just focus on the criticals, and then you get under control quite quickly. So hopefully, you don't have very many of those. And then you move it onto the highs, and you slowly keep moving that barrier. Just on that, again, this comes back to reporting. There is, if you're saying to the organisation, right, just focus on your crits and your highs, there is no point reporting on those moderates and those lows, because all they're doing is confusing the numbers. Because the number of vulnerabilities versus the severity is kind of a logarithmic thing. You may have like 5 criticals, 50 highs, 5,000 mediums. Somebody looking at our data, your eye goes to that 5,000, that's the big scary number, whereas in terms of risk, it's not. It's the 5 criticals at the other end that are the actual real scary bit of that. Focusing on automation means that actually you end up remediating a lot of the lower stuff for free. So when people building things for patching, say, all the criticals, they go, well, we can do this within 7 days. However, Bob runs this, and if Bob goes on holidays, we're snookered. So we've automated it so that anyone can now press the button that does all the criticals. And it's like, well, the tech you're using for doing those criticals works just as well on highs, works just as well on moderate. In fact, it's kind of harder to not just use that same tech for everything. So whilst at the start of this process, they go into thinking, oh my God, we've got 100,000 lows to deal with. I mean, don't bother, but even by the time they get to that point, it's like, we've only got 3,000. How's that happened? It's like, well, oddly enough, your automated patching you built at the beginning of it, it's patching all the lows just as easily. Risk acceptance. Again, if I've got a longer slot, this is something that I would talk about a lot more in a lot more depth. Technical risk acceptance is something I feel very strongly about. Business risk acceptance, fine. I get it. There's a good point for it. It's useful. Technical risk acceptance, especially for vulnerabilities, is a nonsense. All it is transference of ownership, transference of guilt, transference of risk, and sort of appeasing people's guilt. We did away with that. A vulnerability is either there or it's not. If somebody can't, for whatever reason, can't remediate that within their agreed timescale, great. We'll write it up, we'll document it, we'll say why, but ultimately we're not going to go, oh yeah, security of, we get that, we know you're trying really hard, we'll risk accept that for you. It's a nonsense. It's like the risk isn't accepted, the risk is still there. all we're doing by accepting it is making it a securities risk. It's like, well, it's your risk, it's your stack, it's your stuff. So I'm very much against the idea of risk acceptance. I do support the concept of risk rescores. Sometimes the prioritization you've given to a vulnerability, there may be other mitigations you haven't taken into account. It may be it goes all the way down to, well, that thing over there you're saying high is high. We can't, it will never happen for us because we're never using that particular configuration. So like, okay, I'll buy that. If that's never going to happen, we'll rescore that all the way down to informational. It's still there. The software is still vulnerable, but it's now down at score 0. It's informational. You don't need to do anything with it, but it's still, it's still there. Again, on the report, by reporting on risk, not the efficacy of patching, it nullifies all those hard-to-patch arguments when people go, oh, it's a legacy system, oh, we can't get patches for that, we can't do anything like that anymore. It's like, yeah, fair enough. Can't argue with that. If you can't patch it, you can't patch it. Doesn't stop the risk being there. So I'm not going to throw you under the bus because you can't work out how I patch it, but I will happily say, this area, this estate, bit of the estate over here, it's a risk. It's a genuine risk. There are probably good reasons why it's a risk, but it doesn't stop it being a risk just because we understand why it's hard to mitigate it in other ways. Getting teams to document why they have persistent SLA failures is actually risk acceptance, or should I say, fulfills the same role as risk acceptance without that transfer of risk. So persistent SLA failure, same sort of thing. It's like, why aren't you patching? Oh, we can't patch this because of X. Like, we'll document that, we'll write the risk up, but it's still your problem, it's still your risk, not securities. And it doesn't, you don't get this whole Catholic Church, I will absolve you of your sins sort of nonsense. It's like, well, it's your risk, you manage it. And in the reporting, we also very much focus on the right, we focus on people with the right behaviours, not the bad-looking numbers. So if people have built an awesome thing that hasn't really actually had any real benefit, but over the next year, it will make it easier. If they built an auto-patching thing that at the moment doesn't really give the benefits, but it'll show. We report that because by shouting out about the right behaviours, other bits of the company go, oh, well, they've done a cool thing, we should do a cool thing. And there's a little bit of gamesmanship in there. A lot of people try to gamify their numbers. It's like, oh, they've patched more than you. Nonsense. It's a stupid thing. You end up with people patching to make reports look good rather than actually to reduce risk. But if you focus on the behaviour, everyone's, well, they're doing the right thing, we should probably do the right thing as well. And it actually, that perpetuates itself. Oh, of course not. There was one more. The final bit with this is, everything I've said there, make it all flexible. At the beginning of this journey, people will think it's impossible. People will think it's such a hard thing to do. They'll remember these huge numbers. So you set the bars very, very loose. If people want a 90-day window for patching criticals, suicidal, but if that's what they want, start them there, because that's still better than not having one. And when they go, actually, we can do that really easily. Move it down to 30, then to 7, and get where we are now, where criticals are generally patched under incident conditions rather than actually to an SLA. But people are scared of that big hit. But bringing it down slowly over and over time makes it a lot more comfortable journey for you. And time-wise, I'm actually a little bit ahead of what I want. So, ladies and gentlemen, that is kind of my little guide to risk-based vulnerability management in a nutshell. I, for once, have got to the end, and we have time for questions. If you are familiar with the in-betweeners, you're not asking that question. Well, you can ask that question, but I'm not answering that question. And I've got 1 or 2 sitters in the audience, so 1 or 2 people who understand what's underneath that redaction. I'm glad that Stu's disappeared, because I can guarantee he'd be asking questions about Lego.
Yeah.
So, realistically, actually, any questions?
Yes.
Go. I definitely encourage it. We very much have a policy that the how part of remediation is entirely up to the teams. If they want to hire an army of interns and have them manually log on to boxes and update stuff. They can't. We know it's stupid. We're a company that thrives on automation, so we know that they'll probably do it manually for a week or two. You missed your chance. They'll do it manually for a week or two, and then they'll look to automate it, because in our place everything ends up automated. However, I mean, I do similar talks on this on sort of our AppSec program and stuff like that plows into that a little bit more. But yes, the more automation we can push back to them, and not just vulnerabilities, but as you say, config management, deployment management, the more of that they can do, it all feeds into each other. It all gets you to that end point quicker. Just probably, basically I could do another 2 or 3 hours on that. So grab me in the bar at Cyber House Party and I'll happily talk to you more about some of the stuff we did in that.
Any more questions?
Sorry. The reason I'm giggling there is I used to work with Gareth, and he knows that I love PCI. I spend my time with him. To be honest, actually, how do I manage their expectations? I found auditors to work best with you when you're absolutely honest and above board with them. One of the reasons that PCI was always a big struggle for us is that everyone assumes that we've got this lovely sort of 10 machine, tokenized, tiny CDE. No, we've got 2/23 domains. Literally 8,000 machines worth of CDE. So we have to be absolutely on the ball on everything, and it forced us to get it right. And thankfully, I mean, when we started down this road, certainly in the case of PCI that both me and Gareth are mostly familiar with, it was very prescriptive. It was, you must do this, you must do that. That's got to be exactly done this way. Thankfully, over time, it's got a lot more based around, are your behaviours right, not just have you ticked this box. So nowadays, it's actually a lot easier. I get on really well with our QSA. He's bought into risk-based vulnerability management. To be fair, 5 years ago, I couldn't have sold this for an idea. As an idea, PCI would have been, no, all the vulnerability, well, certainly all the highest critical needs, I think it was originally, it would have been all of it. Nowadays, they get this approach. Nowadays, they understand it. They're not asking for compensating controls on this. They've caught up with the times. So how do I manage that? It's like by living now, not living 5 years ago. And I'm sure at some point I'll end up with an old-fashioned QSA that will argue this with me. I spent 5 years arguing this approach. I'm used to it now. More hands?
Done.
Oh,
awesome.
Well done.
Well done.